Boston tree canopy. This was referred to the committee on July 21st, 2021. Councilors Arroyo and Councilor Braden are sponsors of this docket. In accordance with the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying the open meeting laws, we are having this hearing via Zoom. This allows for the City Council to conduct its regular business, but also balance with the current public safety needs of the moment. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It would also be rebroadcasted at another date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. The purpose of this docket is to establish protections for the tree canopy in the city of Boston by preserving the existing tree canopy and replenishing the depleted tree canopy. The docket establishes criteria for the removal of trees, both public and private, implements notice requirements, and establishes standards and timelines for tree replacement. Preserving and maintaining Boston's tree canopy will prevent adverse climate effects such as heat island effect, flooding, and air pollution, and will improve the quality of life for residents. The ordinance also includes provisions that would establish the Urban Forestry Committee and the creation of a street tree stabilization fund. The provisions of this proposal would apply to trees within the city of Boston that are located on city-owned property, private property, or in the public way. Joining us today, along with the lead sponsors, Councilor Braden and Councilor Arroyo, we also have Councilors Bach, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Baker, and Councilor, I think that's who we have. I'm sorry if I'm missing any city councilors. Councilor Flynn, I think I mentioned. And for the administration, we have Chief Mariama White-Hammond, Commissioner Ryan Woods, Liza Meyer, Chief Landscape Architect, Maggie Owens, Planner Parks, and Max Ford Diamond, Superintendent of Trees / the Tree Warden for the City of Boston. The committee will also be joined by David Meshalem, Executive Director of Speak for the Trees, and Orion Kriegman, possibly maybe coming if Orion's here, and Executive Director of the Boston, who is the Executive Director of the Boston Food Forest Coalition. I'll now turn it over to the sponsors, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo and Councilor Liz Braden for opening remarks, and then to my colleagues in order of arrival, then to the administration.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try and keep this short so that we can try to get on a timely schedule. So I'm very excited about doing this tree ordinance in partnership with Councilor Braden. We know that our climate is undergoing rapid changes, dangerous changes. We've seen the UN report, and we know that trees specifically play a role in a number of different issues that we are currently experiencing, including our rising heat island effects all throughout Boston. As a councilor for the southern part of Boston, so Rosendale, Hyde Park, and Mattapan, I know that our recent tree plan, our recent tree study came back and let us know that a little bit over a quarter of Boston is covered by trees. But most of the tree loss that has occurred has happened in my district, frankly, and in our southern part of the city. The goal of this is to create a permanent institutionalized structure to take care of our trees, to ensure that we're doing the necessary work to both protect and enhance our canopy. And so I think the chair, Madam Chair, did a great job sort of running through some of those pieces. But something that I think I would like to do just really quickly is thank both Somerville, Newton, and Cambridge, and the folks that we've spoken in all those different communities in terms of the elected bodies who have done similar work on these things in other places. Our tree ordinance is largely impacted and influenced by what Somerville has done and best practices from these other cities. And finally, I have had meetings with Mr. Woods about how we're going to incorporate the urban forest plan that the city of Boston is doing into this. The goal is to take all of the work that they're doing, the first, I think, tree census that we've really had, look at what the sizes of those trees are that come back, looking at the kind of input they've been receiving, and then craft this to be even stronger and better based on the work that they've done as well. And so this should work in conjunction to and with, and not opposed or opposite or parallel to. So my hope is that this gets very successful results for us moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Arroyo, for including me in this as a lead sponsor on this ordinance. This is an issue that's really near and dear to my heart. In Alston, we have persistent heat island effect because we have large expanses of asphalt and hardscape and very, very few trees. And I know many of my councillors' colleagues have similar experiences in their neighbourhood. I really feel that maintaining our tree canopy and incorporating trees into new development projects can contribute to a really robust green infrastructure that has many benefits. You've already mentioned them, so I won't repeat them, but there's health benefits, there's stormwater management benefits, there's removing the pollutants from our air. And this is a really critical issue, and I really look forward to this afternoon's conversation, and I hope that we will come out the other end with a robust ordinance that will really help support our green infrastructure in the form of our trees. And also, there's a huge need to educate our residents about the benefits of the trees. Many people think, homeowners sometimes think the trees are a nuisance, you have to take care of these leaves and it's a mess. But I really feel that trying to educate our population in Boston about the benefits of trees. I know we've many tree supporters, but we've also some tree skeptics as well. So I come to a balanced, well thought out ordinance would be really helpful in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I also want to say thank you to Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Braden for filing this ordinance, and to Councillor Edwards for chairing this. Having a healthy urban tree canopy, it's critical in our city, not only for our quality of life, as trees not only keep our neighborhoods beautiful, but they also provide filters for pollution. They absorb excessive stormwater runoff. They provide shade during hot summer nights and other environmental benefits as well. We also know that lack of trees contribute to heat islands effects, which impacts neighborhoods like Chinatown and Roxbury. In my district, the lack of trees impact Chinatown, the South Boston waterfront, the Fort Point, where we see massive heat waves. We know that urban tree canopy can help reduce heat by providing shade, cooling off the air and reducing stormwater runoff. As we face a challenging climate that would bring us more heat waves, we need to preserve our precious trees. I have worked closely with groups like Mothers Out Front on the issue of gas leaks, and know from our walks throughout the South End that gas leaks negatively impact and kill our trees. I have also filed a hearing order to discuss the process of tree removals in the city with Councillor Braden. We hope to have that over the next 30 days or so. So I'm glad that this ordinance is being discussed here, and looking forward to supporting it. And then just as a brief note, the historic districts in many of the cities, in many of the neighborhoods, also have an impact on trees as well. Some of them actually limit the number of trees in a historic areas. So let's discuss that. I know that's the case in Fort Point, and I believe it's also the case in the Bay Village area as well. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my City Council colleagues, but also to Commissioner Woods and his team that do an excellent job on this issue.
And to Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And I just want to echo everyone's thanks to Councillors Arroyo and Braden for focusing on us on this, and really focusing on, that fact that I think has started to become common knowledge amongst us on the council, but not necessarily out there in the world, that a huge amount of that loss, as Councillor Arroyo said, that we've experienced of trees has been private property trees. And so we need people to understand both the real significant public goods and positive externalities of planting trees and keeping trees, and also the negative externalities of losing them. And I think the time has come for a more codified process around this. I do want to say, and actually, but very grateful to Councillor Arroyo for flagging this as well. I'm lucky to have a number of tree advocates in my district, and I had heard from them initially some anxiety about, we've got this process ongoing with the Parks Department, and we feel like they've included us, and we want to make sure that those conversations don't get cut off by the council's conversations. But I think Councilor Arroyo and I are on the same page that like what we want here is to harmonize these conversations. And I know, and I just want to express my appreciation to the Parks Department, because I feel like I've been following this process for a while. And frankly, for a while, the city was sort of talking about, we were launching this urban forestry planning process and we were going to have a committee, but we really weren't there. And I feel like now at this point, what I'm hearing from the folks involved on the advocate side is really feeling like you are in the thick of it and you're doing this work. And so grateful to you for that. And happy that we as the council can join this conversation, but really, make sure that it's a harmonized one that gets us to the right place on the right timeline. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also the sponsors for putting this forth. I've been a tree person my entire life, come from a long line of tree people, pun intended. I've planted multiple trees myself. And just, I'm thankful to be here on this one here. I just want to make sure that we have a lane for the existing trees and how do we maintain those. I live up by abut Savin Hill Park, and we have a number of old oaks that could use some maintenance. So the plan with, planting more trees and how do we get more canopy, but also what are we going to do for our existing trees, those heritage trees that have been providing shade and coolness for neighborhoods for 100 years or more. Excited about this and just want to be supportive and thank you for all coming. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just conclude. I'm excited about this conversation, codifying a real way that prioritizes trees in a city that is forever growing and developing. If we don't, we will see what is happening in East Boston, which is #1 for the lack of tree canopy. I would say we're the baldest neighborhood, and Charlestown is #3. And so we are dealing with that. We have the heat island effect. We have concerns, honestly, about asthma rates. And I do know that if you prioritize trees, you're prioritizing the health of the community, not just the aesthetic quality. I think that as we develop, we have pushed and changed our standards for how we build in this city with Berto yesterday, with the zoning amendment to make sure we're trying to integrate and be more equitable. This is only part of that same conversation, how trees belong and will grow and will flourish in the city of Boston. So I want to give a shout out to, I think it's Noah and East Boston Main Streets for actually handing out little saplings for us to plant trees and helping us understand how to grow our own trees on our private land. I think that I'd love to see the city continue to increase that. I want to thank ACE, Speak for the Trees, Mothers Out Front, and several other harbor keepers and other, I think, organizations that are push for environmental stewardship in our next generation as well and leadership. So I'm now going to turn it over to the administration. And then from there, if it's okay with the lead sponsors, we might go, they're going to have a deck and then they each might have some comments. We can go to the two advocates right after and then perfect. Okay. So turning it over to the administration, we have we have up first, Chief Mariama White-Hammond.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank the council as a whole, and particularly Councilor Arroyo and Councilor Breeden for bringing this up. I think this is a central issue. And I think, as has been said, I think there's more public awareness, but we need to do even more, just like some of the other issues that we're dealing with in terms of climate change. We need to move from awareness to action. And I think this ordinance can be in alignment with the work that has been moving forward to make that happen. As has been said, our cabinet has been convening an effort called Healthy Places, which brings both the Heat Islands work and the urban forestry plan together to look at how both of those, but both mitigation in terms of including more trees and adaptation in terms of making sure our most vulnerable residents are prepared for increased heat is one of the ways that we've been trying to move that forward. And I think that council, because I know that folks weighed in also in the budget process, as we've had some more resources available to us to begin moving some of that forward, and have been in conversation. I also want to say that I think, again, that these, as has been already noted, that this ordinance can move in tandem and really in alignment with the work that's already been going. I do want to note and maybe apologize a bit. I think as many of you know, I've tried to forge within our cabinet a new way of relating to the council and tried to have a much more collaborative process. We've done with Berto 2.0. I know that we've invited Councilors Flynn and Mejia to participate in the Heat Islands work because they expressed interest, and with Councilor Bach on green jobs and historic preservation. I hope that moving forward, we could have the same kind of collaborative relationship on this work. I think we, in reflection, I would love to know which councilors are interested. We will loop you in as we have in other sort of core issues that the cabinet is working on, just so that there's deep alignment, and so that we don't possibly having two processes going at the same time that could sort of work at cross purposes. But I think that those conversations have already begun. I'm glad to see that, and we will make sure that within the cabinet, we think even more about how we can bring you in to those spaces that are already moving. I also want to just take a moment to thank Max Ford Diamond and really the whole entire tree crew. There is the important work of planting trees and maintaining trees, but I do also want to note that this summer we've had some pretty exceptional storms. We did not get the worst of it over this weekend. We didn't get what we were planning for, but I want to just also note that the tree division ends up being on call when those storms come, which means that all those 311 calls end up being directed over to the Fenway, and they are out making sure that our roadways are cleared, that our communities, which might have experienced limbs and yards and spaces, are relieved. So I do want to just note that the tree division has been working quite hard this year, not just on sort of planting and pruning, but also the very real effects of climate change and how it's also affecting our tree canopy and affecting the health of our trees. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Commissioner Woods, who will outline sort of some of the work that has been going and the process that's moving. I had the opportunity to attend a number of those meetings, including the equity group, that there's sort of three bodies that are moving together. Really thankful, just want to say a note of deep gratitude to all the community groups who are serving and giving of their time in the evenings to sort of help us think this through in a way that is both acknowledging the importance of trees, but also doing so in a way that really embraces equity and makes sure that we bring community members in so they experience it not as a sort of punitive measure, but as an invitation to participate in the protection and nurturing of our tree canopy.
Thanks, Chief. For those that don't know me, my name is Ryan Woods. I serve as the Parks Commissioner for the City of Boston. The Chief called out some of our staff. We're also joined by Liza Meyer, who's on for our Chief Landscape Architect, Max Ford Diamond, the city's lead arborist and the tree warden for the City of Boston, and Maggie Owens, who many people have been working with. She is our planner, and she's been running the process for our urban forestry plan. So we embarked on this exciting plan. We're grateful to the council for supporting the urban forestry plan, and we've been overwhelmed with the amount of engagement. Stoss Landscape Urbanism and forestry consultant Urban Canopy Works were selected to co-lead this effort as we come up with our first urban forest plan. This 20-year plan will set citywide goals for canopy protection, be responsive to climate change and development, and enhance the quality of life for all Bostonians. The Urban Forest Plan is a collaborative effort that includes a community advisory group, has interdepartmental working groups, and community outreach. Recognizing that environmental injustice exists in Boston, the planning process has support for communities that have been disproportionately impacted by environmental stressors. Planning is going to touch upon a wide variety of topics such as ecology, design, policy, practices, and funding. And the final plan of this document will highlight policy tools to control canopy loss on private property, as well as guidelines for protecting and expanding canopy, whether private property, on streets, or in parks. Over the past 5 years, tree removals on residential, private, and institutional property have been the main contributors to canopy loss. And this finalized plan will provide recommendations for canopy protection and expansion through proposed changes to the development review process, as well as new policies and ordinances, including draft language and methods of enforcement aimed at protecting and expanding the tree canopy. We believe it's incredibly important for ordinances to be drafted in ways that are clear, enforceable, and equitable. So together, the Urban Forest Plan is doing the work that outlines our goals for the urban forest and the real challenges in accomplishing those goals. Together, we'll come up with ideas and strategies that expand and protect trees in a way that is implementable and that addresses historical and continuing injustices. The goal is then to have our collective work inform these policies for real, enforceable, lasting change. So it's our hope that we'll have these suggested policies this spring for the administration and council's review prior to fiscal year 23 budget time. The city does have a tree warden who I'm going to pass this off to, Max Ford Diamond. He holds monthly public meetings to review applications that people submit for street tree removals in the city sidewalk pits. Any trees that deemed dead, diseased, or hazardous are removed after inspection by our certified arborists. And I'm now going to just pass it off to Max to explain our current process, how things work through our Chapter 87 process. So Max, passing it off to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. As everyone has said, and if you do not already know me, my name is Max Ford Diamond. I'm the tree warden and city arborist for the city of Boston. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss establishing tree protections for the city of Boston's tree canopy. The good news is that there are measures already in place currently to protect trees within the right-of-way in the city of Boston. The principal law that governs and guides tree wardens in Massachusetts is Mass General Law, Chapter 87, which dates back to 1899 when horse and carriages were known and used instead of cars. These mandates include all cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to have a tree warden who is responsible for trees within the public right-of-way. As tree warden of the city of Boston, I have the responsibility under Mass General Law, Chapter 87, to protect and oversee the care, maintenance, planting, and sometimes removal of the almost 40,000 street trees planted within the public right-of-way in the city of Boston. I myself am a Massachusetts certified arborist, tree risk assessment qualified arborist, and a Massachusetts certified pesticide applicator, along with many of my colleagues who hold these same credentials. As tree warden, I am both the manager of public trees as well as their advocate. It is my duty to not only protect the trees, but where necessary to protect the public from trees, as Chief White-Hammond said earlier. Myself, along with Chief Landscape Architect Liza Meyer and the Executive Secretary of the BPRD Commission, and in the past, 2 deputy tree wardens, along with the Commissioner Ryan Woods, make up what we would call the tree board. As Commissioner Woods stated previously, we hold monthly tree hearings as outlined in Chapter 87 at the first Thursday of every month. Public hearing notices are placed on trees 2 weeks prior to the hearing taking place, as well as in local newspapers. As Commissioner Woods said earlier, tree hearings are only held when a proponent requests to remove a live and healthy public shade tree that is usually hindering them in some way from completing their desired project end. Proponents requesting hearings for a variety of reasons, including installing driveway curb cuts, constructing new homes or businesses, or in some cases for public improvement projects, including reconstruction roadways and sidewalks. The holding of such hearings does not mean that the tree or trees will be approved to be removed. However, if they are, we do require reimbursement based on the diameter of the tree to be paid into a tree fund in order for the City of Boston Parks Department to make up for the loss of canopy with nearby new tree plantings. It is also my duty as tree warden to investigate the unlawful cutting, removal, and damage of public shade trees, and with the help of the law department to find whomever is responsible for such damage in order to recoup the value of such canopy loss. I thank you again for inviting me to this. I hope I've helped shed some light and clarity onto the hard work that the Urban Forestry Division does every single day, and to my colleagues to ensure that a healthy and safe tree canopy for the residents of the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. We now have Maggie Owens, who has our slide deck to show us.
Sure. I'll be sharing my screen. Just double checking. Okay, sure. All right. One moment. Here we are. Yes, so thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here and to have these conversations. Before I dive into everything, as the chief mentioned, as you all know about, thanks to your support, we've got the Healthy Places effort. And for people who are less familiar, this is an effort to bucket 3 overlapping projects. They have really overlapping themes of health and climate resilience. And because we know engagement fatigue is real, and it's a lot to track 3 separate projects and such, we also want to do so that we're really coordinating, that these plans are not developing in isolation from one another. So this initiative is an effort to lower barriers to engagement and communicate more effectively and even pool resources. So coming together has started to pay off, and it's been easier to answer constituent questions, increase trust, and receive additional resources. So I'd just like to encourage everyone to sign up for the newsletter as well. Those watching, you'll receive the latest updates on the 3 projects along with ways to get involved. Now, what is the Urban Forest Plan? I'll be giving just a brief overview and then going into kind of the community advisory board structure, and then what's been happening lately. Without lingering too long, because I've already had some good introductions. The Urban Forest Plan is a framework for improving the health, longevity, and number of trees in the city. It'll develop a range of goals and strategies, policies that will nurture a sustainably managed and equitable urban forest in line with the ambitions and desires of residents, and in a way that goes beyond the utilitarian aspects of trees, but also speaks to the spiritual, cultural, and civic role trees and caring for trees plays in our lives. And to do that, this project is looking at all the trees, private and public, and it looks at all the caretakers of our trees, because this is an all hands on deck effort. So many people, agencies, organizations, and institutions are involved with keeping trees alive. And that's why we're looking at so many aspects: funding, policy, design, community efforts, workforce development, staffing, and more. And we're looking to do that all from the foundation of equity and environmental justice, rather than considering it as a component of our work. And that's why it's been such a boon to have Dr. Nina Estrella Luna as our equity advisor on the consultant team. And also, there are too many people to name, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least give a shout out to our amazing CAB members, the Office of Immigrant Advancement, the Office of Language and Communications Access, and the Equity and Environmental Justice Employee Working Group for their support of this work and helping make it more inclusive. Now, this project has 4 major pieces to call attention to, as outlined in these different steps. And we're really in the information gathering phase, kind of sketching out what do people feel like is happening, what are the challenges, preliminary ideas. And you'll see that there's existing conditions and analysis. And I'd just like to point out that research is an iterative process for this project. We began some analysis to get conversations started with community members, but we will also rely on those conversations with community members to then determine where to push our analysis. In this way, we're trying to be very deliberate by holding this question: whose perspectives and values are represented in the stories told through analysis and plan development? Carrying that conversation through to the end of this plan will serve as a guardrail of sorts, reminding us that justice relies on deliberate consideration of narratives, and that deliberation will be baked into policy recommendations that will come out of this project. Now, for probably an unnecessary amount of detail, we're right here in the planning process. And I'll go over for some of the other community engagement efforts we're undertaking. But I do want to emphasize that as we go through the Community Advisory Board workshops and attend community meetings, if you haven't had a chance to participate, do not worry. We've got a long ways to go. This is a long project, and we're going to be doing more and more to engage people that haven't already been contacted. And we're coordinating closely once more with the heat resilience study on strategies and modeling to ensure that these plans are complementary. So the Community Advisory Board, and I'll call that CAB, the CAB, are providing their perspectives, priority, and feedback on this project. They're also assisting in spreading the word about the project and help guide engagement efforts. We took a unique approach to this CAB by including the Intergovernmental Working Group and creating these three bodies under which together they form the Community Advisory Board. The mix of government, community representatives, and institutional representatives is really important in bringing everyone along together through this planning process, because as I mentioned, it's an all hands on deck effort to expand Canopy and maintain it. And collaborating partners, I have the definitions here, so maybe I won't read those, but I'll just call attention to, we know that we have to be intentional about centering voices from historically excluded and currently marginalized communities, and structuring participation and feedback in this way helps us to do that. Forming the Equity Council is particularly important, as there are often people or entities who've traditionally had access to this sort of work and sometimes come to the forefront of the work at the expense of those who may be living with the results of planning processes. And so that's why you also see this discussion, listening, relationship building arrow between the Equity Council and Intergovernmental Working Group. There will be efforts to continue to build relations and open channels of communication there. And all in all, it's about 70 people on the Community Advisory Board. We just had our second Community Advisory Board workshop last night. Now, one of the major things the CAB is helping us with right now is assessing the state of the urban forest using this matrix of a sustainable urban forest. We do this over the course of 3 workshops titled The Trees, the Players, and the Management Approach. After the workshops, the project team will be synthesizing everything we heard from this group and diving into some of the topics deeper. That can take multiple forms depending on the topic. We could be establishing focus groups, have more one-on-one interviews, have the IWG tackle certain topics in their working group, or have additional Equity Council meetings. We'll also be doing peer city research. But we need to get through the workshops first to determine the best steps there. And if you'd like to take a closer look at the matrix, we've got this online along with all the information I'm presenting here today. We'll be posting CAB 2 notes, including the results for the second part of the matrix highlighted here online. So what's happening now? The CAB is a major part of the project, but we've also got other updates. So the public street tree inventory is complete and undergoing quality control review, which is very exciting. And we, as mentioned, have begun the forestry analysis, but we're looking for more community input as well to help guide that. And then we're also gathering all the information. What are our current operations? What does our financing look like in the past? What is our staffing? Those sorts of things that really make something implementable or not. And I'd just like to shout out to this photo voice effort. Please be sure to visit our website and maybe consider telling your story about how trees play a role in your life and what they mean to you. We want to make sure that we're capturing all the different ways in which trees matter to you. And the work that we're doing as part of this project is already being used. It's not like we're just going to go through this planning process and then work begins. We can begin doing things as this goes. So we're not only building relationships with people, but we also have data such as the public street tree inventory that is providing a window into the wild street tree population. So this database, once again, is still under review, but it's immediately informative to the tree division's work and like understanding where open pits are, the conditions of trees, et cetera. And the image on the left-hand side is from a post back in May when the street tree inventory was in progress. And at that time, we began to get a sense of biodiversity. We produced charts for the top species of the neighborhoods that had been inventoried at that time. And we saw that honey locust was super dominant in most neighborhoods. And so things like that, it's really interesting. The project's breadth and the fact that it's Boston's first urban forest plan means we'll be making interesting discoveries throughout the project that are critical to strong policymaking, and we'll be sure to keep you updated along the way, whether that's through Healthy Places newsletter or other avenues. And just a reminder, if you are interested in exploring some of the data and resources here that I've had in this presentation, most of that is online. Thank you.
Thank you. To the administration was Liza, or the chief landscape architect, was she going to be presenting?
I'm all set. I'm just here to answer any questions as they come up. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
It's our presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I will now turn it over to two advocates, or I don't know if Orion is here, but I do see David from Speak for the Trees is here. So I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you. I wanted to thank everyone for inviting us. My name is David Meshulam. I'm Executive Director of Speak for the Trees Boston, a nonprofit organization focused on tree equity in the city of Boston. I want to just take a moment to thank the councilors here, especially Councilors Edwards, Arroyo, and Braden, for inviting me and for convening this important meeting to discuss a proposed tree ordinance in the city. And I also want to just give a shout out to all of you who had a chance to visit with our teens this summer. It was a wonderful program. You brought so much to the table. They learned so much. And where's Max? Is he still here? Max, they just love spending the day with you out in the field and really appreciate all your time. So as you're well aware, trees are a critical component of Boston's infrastructure, providing innumerable benefits to residents of the city. It's especially critical that we preserve, protect, and grow Boston's forests as we deal with the consequences of climate change, including hotter summers and increased rainfall. Trees further improve the quality of all Bostonians' lives through reduced air pollution, building a sense of community, and reducing stress. And I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but as you know, according to the city's own analysis, over the past 5 years, Boston's tree canopy coverage has remained relatively stable at 26% or so. But this number masks an inequitable distribution of canopy across the city, with some neighborhoods having almost 50% coverage, such as West Roxbury, and others having coverage in the single digits, such as East Boston, as Councilor Edwards shared with us. Furthermore, the latest LiDAR analysis has shown that the canopy has changed differently in different parts of the city. Hyde Park, for example, has seen a dramatic decrease in coverage, and the change also depends on land use type, with trees on the right of way, thank you, Park Department, making up for much of the loss we see on private property. With the city's urban forest plan underway, and I'm a member of the Community Advisory Board, thank you, Maggie, for all your work on that. In the coming months, we're going to learn much more about the state of the city's urban forest and how we can protect it. Now, to ensure a strong urban forest for the next generation of Bostonians, we'll need to plan, maintain, and commit to our trees. I think we all agree on that. And one thing is clear, a strong ordinance will be required to ensure that Boston's urban forest remains healthy, equitable, and diverse for decades to come. Other cities across the state and across the country have crafted ordinances to protect their trees, and Boston should too. Now, this process is really an exciting opportunity. The Department of Conservation and Recreation at the state level has a review of ordinances across the state. And in its opening paragraph, I'm just going to read from that. It recommends that the process begin, quote, with some soul searching and information gathering. What are the goals of the community? What are the needs? What are the issues that a tree ordinance could clarify? What resources does the community currently have? So as we embark on these efforts, we too must grapple with these questions as we develop an ordinance that speaks to the unique challenges and opportunities facing Boston. And to help us move forward today, I've included links in my printed remarks that I'll share with you that can serve as blueprints for how we might proceed. But for the remainder of my time, I'd like to jump into the weeds, so to speak, and provide a few first pass suggestions regarding potential places where Councilor Arroyo's proposed ordinance might be improved. So first, we need to better understand what is happening in Boston's urban tree canopy. The city's UFP will provide data that should inform and drive the priorities of any ordinance. Where is loss happening and why? What are the other social, racial, and environmental justice issues that play out the neighborhood where tree is located? Similarly, where in the city should tree preservation and replacement take place? The ordinance needs to be driven by data in a way that speaks to the current needs of the city and prioritizes certain areas depending on demographics, heat island, and environmental burdens. Second, Oversight of the tree protection needs to be better aligned with the city's zoning and development processes and should be tied to the permitting process, especially as it relates to the BPDA. This must include an assessment of all the trees on our property and a preservation plan before any permits are issued. Third, the street tree stabilization fund needs to be better defined to include activities such as education, tree planting on private property, and other maintenance and care costs associated with private and public tree planting. I might suggest this might also include opportunities to provide stipends for individuals who sit on the Urban Forest Committee as a way to ensure equitable community representation. Fourth, specific sections from the ordinance should be added, removed, or amended. So first, I believe all large trees provide important ecosystem benefits. Therefore, no distinction should be made between individual invasive and non-invasive species. Second, significant trees should be defined as trees above 6 inches of DPH, not 8 inch. Third, specific to section 715.13, subsection 2E and F, I believe those sections should be removed or amended. Those are the sections that discuss home-owned properties on 1, 2, and 3 unit trees. There should be much stricter enforcement, 1, 2, or 3 unit owner-occupied buildings. There should be much stricter enforcement among all property types in Boston. Fourth, I think there should be a separate classification for so-called heritage trees, trees that are 24 inches or greater in diameter at breast height, or trees that are significant historically, as these trees are irreplaceable. These should face a much higher barrier and fees for removal, as no number of replacement trees can ever replace the ecosystem, health benefits, and social services that these heritage trees provide. Fifth, the fine structure for replacement and fines needs to match with scientifically quantifiable benefits provided by each tree, the size and scope of the development project, and the harm being done to residents. And I'm referring here to section 715.13, subsection 6A. And finally, I believe that most of references to chapter 87, as Tree Warden Ford Diamond mentioned, can be removed as they're redundant. Reference to chapter 87 should only be made when the city's ordinance extends beyond the requirements of the state. I also believe there's an opportunity actually to expand chapter 87 to other public trees, including park trees, and that's under the purview of Commissioner of Parks and Rec, Ryan Woods. And I also think, as mentioned earlier, there should be an audit of chapter 87 hearings that might inform how this ordinance has been applied and how it might be improved without the city. 6, I think cities such as Baltimore, I've looked at their ordinance, have an ordinance that protects what are called microforests, or tracts of land of a certain size, where several dozen trees provide communal benefits. In such cases, many smaller trees provide benefits that are greater than the sum of their parts. Boston should consider a similar ordinance on city-owned and private property. I also believe 7th, that the ordinance should consider several best practices informed by International Society of Arboriculture, or ISA standards. Among these to consider that were not in the ordinance were a definition and incorporation of the critical root zone, which is the area underground where roots might be impacted. Second, there should be no tree topping on any project, so that's not allowing the removal of entire top of trees. Third, there should be tree protection during construction through the creation of additional barriers, oversight, and fines. So when I was in New York pre-pandemic, I noticed that there were these large structures that were sort of these crates, 2x4s, that were protecting trees during construction. There weren't these wraparounds, so a tree would actually be protected if a large piece of equipment came by. And finally, I think there should be policies incentivizing proper tree care and planting, not merely punishment for removal, whether in this ordinance or in other policies or plans. One example might be providing tax rebates for the maintenance of significant trees on private property. So I will remit these comments with the links to whoever is the right person. I believe that might be Councilor Edwards, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna check again. We've been joined by Counselor Julia Mejia as well, and just checking to see if, okay, I don't think the other panelist is here. So I'm happy to kick off a series of questions from the counselors. We can start with the lead sponsors to go through whatever questions, suggestions, or to respond to some of the suggestions from David. And then we will do our best to get to public testimony. We do have, and I want to acknowledge the amount of emails that we received from many people in the community. Thank you so much for writing about our tree canopy. And we will then go to public testimony after a round of questions from the counselors to allow for the public to engage as well in this conversation. Before I kick it off for questions, I see Counselor Mejia, you're on camera. If you want to do some quick intro, some comments, and then we'll go to the lead sponsors.
Yes, no, good afternoon. I don't want to take up too much of the time. Just want to just note for the record that I'm in full support of this initiative, and I am highly encouraged that we're looking at this with an equitable lens. And so looking forward to not only listening in, but figuring out how, as an office, we will be able to support this moving forward. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Counselor Arroyo, then Counselor Braden, I would think for questions, and then we'll just continue on in order of arrival.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the panelists. Thank you, David, for those suggestions in terms of ways we can incorporate and do this. For folks that are listening, for folks that hear this later, for folks that are going to comment, the goal here is to have this hearing to discuss why this is important, why we need to do this, and ways in which we can strengthen it. Eventually, we'll have working sessions to strengthen the actual language and edit the language in ways that we think make this a better, stronger, more equitable ordinance that actually achieves the goals that we're seeking to do. And so that process will happen. And the goal is to have that happen in partnership with the urban forest plan that we're currently conducting in the city of Boston, so that we're not later having to go back and change that, as well as the fact that the urban forest plan has done some really, as Councilor Bach noted, some really good outreach into communities and folks that are actively participating in that, who would like to have what they're saying in those meetings matter here. And I want that too. So we'll be doing something like that in partnership. So thank you all for that. And I appreciate the strong suggested language is that not just you presented, David, but we've received emails for the last 2 weeks of folks who have things that they would like to see in this. And so there's certainly space for all of that. Really quickly, I'm going to go to Commissioner Woods or whoever is the appropriate person, might be Chief Mariama, who might make sense for these. But what is the department's current capacity to oversee tree removals in the city?
Sure. So right now, tree removals are on street trees when they go down. So we have a crew in-house of 4 people that do removals to clear evacuation routes as tree emergencies happen overnight to make sure everything's clear. But dead trees that just exist in the tree pits, we do contract that work out. So we have a contracted firm on board to do regular removals.
And what is the department's current capacity to enforce state regulations on public shade trees?
We have our one tree warden that does those hearings once a month. So there is that one city tree warden that oversees that process.
Okay, and so one of the major components that I think where the council is going to have to be helpful on this, and obviously in partnership with the administration, is advocating for dollars to make sure that what we put on paper and what we do actually has the resources that it needs to succeed. And so with that in mind, and obviously this could change because the ordinance itself could change, but what additional staffing could you foresee the Parks Department needing for effective tree canopy protection?
So, Councilor, I can speak to that just a little bit. We are actually looking at this in light of the resources that we've already received and the work we're already doing on green jobs. One of the questions we've been asking is, do we expand the tree department by itself? Or do we also potentially expand the capacity of our maintenance, our parks maintenance, to also potentially do tree work? And I'm not saying we've landed on an answer. I know that Councilor Bach and I are planning to go to Philadelphia to look at what some of the work that they're doing with their conservation corps. We've been having some internal conversations. And we will obviously have to have, include in that conversation, some of our union representatives. So, I mean, I think one of the the larger challenges is tree support and maintenance right now is a relatively small group. And the question is there the capacity to grow who is able to support some of that work? And it actually is not just a conversation around trees. If we want to put in more native species, do we have the capacity to train and support our maintenance staff to do more of that? But I do want to note, we can't do more with the same number of maintenance staff we have. So we've begun some internal strategy conversations about what we want to bring back both to the mayor and to the council in terms of budget for next year. But our tree staff is overworked, but so is our maintenance staff. And so during the summer months, I mean, everybody's on overtime all the time. That's not a functional way to sort of move forward some of the bigger sort of pieces of maintenance and other pieces of work that we need to move forward. So I think the question of how we get to a greater level of maintenance is an internal conversation. Like, we haven't even finished, talking with our key staff. I can say, no matter what, it will take more resources to do it. The question is, who do we have do it? How do we support that work? Because it's also true in cemeteries, for instance. They have outside contractors. In many instances, we are using outside contractors because we just do not have the internal staff capacity to do any more than what we're already doing. But how to do that best. And one of the conversations I have to have with Max is, Max, what would it take to really train people to be able to do it? What level of work could maintenance staff potentially do? And then what level of work would dedicated tree staff have to do? But we're glad you're asking the question. Love to talk more about what the right strategy is and what resources would be required to do it.
Yeah, and it sounds like the department's putting thought and effort into how to best maintain that, which is really the goal. I'm aware that you're going to need more resources than you currently have to do more work, right? Like that's just how that's going to have to happen. I think I have more questions here, and I guess it really I kick it to the chair. Would you like me to I have another 4 questions to ask, or I could do a second round if you want to go through the council.
Yeah, let's go through the council. I don't know that everyone has as many questions. Allow for folks who may have to get on and off, and then I'll come back to you before we go to public testimony. Councilor Arroyo.
Perfect. That works for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councilor Braden.
Thank you. Doing a little research on this, during the Menino administration, there was a commitment to plant 100,000 trees in Boston. And I think they didn't reach that target. But one of my big concerns is that we are planting trees, and are we doing an audit of how the survival rate of the trees that we're planting, and then some sort of a forensic post-mortem on what were the contributing factors to why the tree didn't survive? I know there's some concern about gas leaks, but what's your thinking on this at the moment?
I'll start and then I'll pass it off to Max. I can say, yes, there was a commitment back, I believe in 2007 from the Menino administration to plant 100,000 trees, mostly on private property, having people plant trees on their own property to try to reach those goals. And we've moved now to look at the canopy as a whole instead of looking at individual numbers of trees planted to work on that. We do now, with this urban forest plan, we have our first full assessment. So we know what kind of street trees we have, what species they are, what size diameter they are, what condition, is it good, bad, diseased, hazardous, et cetera. So that's the first time, Council, we've even had that information. So now I think we do have that list that work off of. And as a tree dies or gets replaced, we have a working database so we can fill in that information. I'm going to deflect to Max, though. I don't know if we have information post-mortem on or causes on that. On trees.
It's hard to specifically say the causes of mortality of every single tree. We don't have a budget to do soil samples. We don't have the proper tools to do a lot of these tests, whether they be tissue samples of the trees. If you want to check for gas, then you need to have the machines possible to do said work. We do track the mortality rate of our new trees that were planted. We do warranty inspect them every single year for the 2 years after they're planted to make sure they're alive and hold our contractors accountable. We even track the watering trucks that go out from our contractors to water the trees. we look at species of trees that do well and others that do worse. At the time of new planting, I've in my 11 years here, I've tried different species of trees at the recommendation of other tree wardens and landscape professionals. Some have worked, some have not worked, so we look at those figures and we go back to see, how we can, further diversify the canopy in the city. But as Commissioner Wood said, having an actual tree inventory for the first time will actually make us able to run reports and to, see where our statistics are. The most important thing, of course, in the tree inventory is keeping it updated. That's the hardest thing for us to do right now. As we said, there were only a staff of 4 people and only 2 arborists. So, just keeping those kind of numbers intact is a challenge in itself. But we're definitely always looking, to increase it and to, reduce our number of tree mortality.
Very good. And just out of information, is there a more successful tree in this? I know we want biodiversity, but are there particular species that survive better than others?
I think you could say honey locust is probably our most successful tree in the city of Boston.
Yeah, I saw the graph.
Yes. 15, 20 years ago, it was Norway maple. Acer platanoides was the most common tree planted in New England in the 1960s and 70s. We've learned our lesson that from Asian longhorn beetle that is probably not the greatest avenue to go down. We have to further diversify what we have. But a tree that survives and can handle the urban conditions it's a hard thing. It's a hard
Yeah. And then the other issue, and someone's already mentioned it, the issue about heritage trees. I think they require special handling and a special commitment to try and preserve them and keep them. It's such an awesome sight to see. In this neighborhood, we have a copper beech that must be 150 years old, and it's just a magnificent tree. And I just think that they're so much part of our community that they're old friends who are walking around, and we want to make sure that they survive in more adverse conditions as we're facing in the neighborhoods across the city. Anyway, that's all for me now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn? Councillor Flynn? If not, going on to Councillor Bach.
Thanks so much, Councillor Edwards. I think wanted to start by just underscoring what Councillor Arroyo said about resources. I think there's, the more we talk about the urban forestry as green infrastructure, the more we recognize that I think the scale of staff that we have on our public works infrastructure and everything, we couldn't get along with what we get along with on the trees side. And I just think we've got to transform that. And I'm really excited. Chief White-Hammond mentioned it, but sort of the fact that I think the council was able to partner with the administration to pass this green jobs money, and the fact that that's $4 million that doesn't run with the fiscal year exactly, right? That instead runs through the duration of the American Rescue Plan deadline, which is more like 4 years. And I should say, I hope that there will be more added to that total. But for this time being, what's good about it is I'm encouraged at the idea that as the committee does its work and collaborates with the council around this ordinance, as Councillor Arroyo said, that there will be some money that's there to hit the ground running even before the FY23 budget process. And so I think that's an unusual flexibility, right? We don't usually have kind of sums of money that are crossing those fiscal year barriers in the way that we do right now. And so I think that's exciting. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to really devote a significant amount of that kind of green jobs, conservation corps, whatever you want to call it, focus on the urban forestry space, because we know we've got a crazy shortage of arborists. We can't hire for all the spots that we've got. We want to be producing those here in the city of Boston. We want to be having our youth grow up into those roles. And then also, I think that, as the chief said, we have to recognize that there is some work that is sub-arborist level, but that people learning, it could really build our, capacity, that it could put people on a path to some of those other, to maybe actually becoming a certified arborist. And if because they're not here, I'll just say, for Councillor Flaherty, certainly, because I heard about it all the time in the budget process from him, there's a lot of frustration on our side of the council sometimes that in order to get a tree pruned, we have to contract that out, right? And there's a strong feeling of like, we should do more of this stuff in-house, but we can't do more with less. So I just want to strongly say, I think we've got some good resources underway here, but we're going to need more. And I'll definitely be a supporter of that, both in the American Rescue Plan side of things and in the city council's budget process. I also want to say to the department that I'm excited about this idea of sort of collaboration and getting to the right thing in the ordinance, even if it takes a little longer. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but there was a very successful working session I felt earlier this week. In fact, I guess it's yesterday, time is funny, on Birdo 2.0. And I feel like we should just recognize that that's a case of something that the department had like meetings and working sessions with stakeholders on for basically a year prior to, maybe arguably longer, someone can correct me, prior to kind of landing at the language we're at now. And it feels to me like that was time well spent. So I think with this also, balancing the urgency with the sense of the need for time well spent and talking to stakeholders at the outset is important. I guess I have a question for the department, and then I have a question for David. So my question to David would be, in terms of comparisons to other cities, are there any other cities that are far enough along in having passed an ordinance that you're sort of seeing results? Or is everybody still at the stage that they passed them so recently that we don't really have the data yet?
I couldn't be able to tell you specifically. I'm happy to dig into that. There are cities where the value of trees it's more deep rooted in their city. So I'm taking Portland, Oregon, for an example, where I believe they've had an ordinance for decades versus years. I know, for example, the city across the river, Cambridge, has only had an ordinance for a couple of years. So I'm not sure we see much beyond just noise. That's a great question. I would have to go back and look. I also, a couple of years ago, there was a city councilwoman from Vancouver, British Columbia, who came and spoke and shared the ordinance that they had passed there and the difference it made. I'm just getting a text here that Pittsburgh and New York City have ordinances that might be worth looking into. So it's a really good question. And looks like Maggie might have an answer.
Great. Yeah. And I just strongly think that, like, with any of these things, we always have to be asking ourselves, like, what are we trying to achieve? What's the delta that we think will happen with the ordinance that isn't happening without? And it's always hard to measure counterfactual, but to the extent we can tell what's going on in other places. Maggie, did you want to weigh in on that or anything that I said?
Yeah, I'd just say, what's cool about our consultant team and having the community advisory board is that we do also have Urban Canopy Works and American Forests who have done a lot of policy making around the country, and they'll be helping us do some of that peer city research in the different avenues. So peer city for maintenance might be different than peer city for ordinances. And so it'll be really fun to take a look at all of our partners. And I'm sure that those cities that David just mentioned will be coming up again.
Yeah, that's great. No, and we've been talking to American Forest and the sort of Green Jobs Conservation Corps conversation, and they're really a great resource. And then my last question is a little bit sort of putting out into the public space a thing that I have heard whispered, which is that, I think historically we've had a challenge sometimes. Like, one of the reasons why we often ask abutters if we're going to put a new street tree in is that an abutter who's opposed to a tree has several ways to sort of surreptitiously kill it. And unfortunately that is a practice, right? When you don't have that buy-in, they put a nail in, they do, various things that sort of kill the young tree. And then it's like, oh, what do you know? Trees keep dying here. And I guess it would strike me that we probably are dealing with a similar challenge in legislating around this, in the sense of needing to think about how do we do things that are stern enough that they really incentivize and drive the right behavior, but do not drive folks into a sort of surreptitious approach to getting rid of their trees. And I wonder if anybody on the parks team or anybody can sort of speak to that concern.
I also want to sort of add another layer that I just think I haven't been in government long enough, so I think I just still say what I think and maybe I shouldn't. I also think there is a challenge to making sure we get this right so that lower income communities and communities of color do not experience this as what we often do as a racial and class issue. And so I do also want to know the other reason to slow down and get this right is that we have a really great group of people on our equity community advisory board. We need them to be the voices around this, because otherwise people will experience this as the tree huggers. And there's all the issues of gentrification and people feeling like they no longer belong in the city. And if they feel like it is people who can afford to stay or people who have come to the city relatively recently, putting forward regulations that make it hard for them to stay in their homes and afford to take care of their homes, it will be negatively received. So there's no way we get the kind of planting we need on private property or the maintenance on private property if this is not something that the whole city feels like we're joining in together to save ourselves and not just the agenda of one group or another. And so I think that's something we're really, really trying to do in the way the urban forestry plan has been put together. And I think, again, I know that Maggie already mentioned, but Dr. Nina Estrella Luna has been instrumental in helping that happen. I was in the subgroup. We had breakout rooms and people had to look at different questions. And I was in the Spanish-speaking group. And it was really exciting to talk about, like, people have these conversations about what in our culture can we revive that already values trees? How can we actually ask people to tap into that? What can we do? We talked about even things like naming trees or naming the fact that some of the biggest work to make sure that nature is valued legally as a part of sort of humanity and given the kinds of rights that unfortunately in this country we give to corporations. But it was in Latin America that idea of honoring the rights of nature was started. And how do we make sure that we are putting forward those indigenous voices, we are putting forward those voices of color, so that when people hear this, it does not play into another narrative that potentially causes us to move away from the kind of work that we need. So I think I just want to thank the folks that are at the table and name that they are thinking expansively about how we do this in a way that every part of our city feels engaged, that it's culturally appropriate, and so people don't have incentives to sort of cut the tree down and say, well, send me a bill, right? That people together, we really want to value, protect, and amplify our canopy.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Braden, your hand is raised. Did I skip you unintentionally?
I don't want to jump in before anyone else who hasn't spoken has had a chance.
Okay.
But, I think that brings, to follow on from Chief Mariama's comments, I really feel that there's an important piece of this is education about the benefits and the value of our tree canopy, and starting at the young age, having kids plant saplings and one place is schoolyards. Like I'm always struck at how desolate and how some schoolyards are without a lack of shade trees. I grew up with schoolyards that had large chestnut trees and there were wonderful spaces for kids to play and learn about nature. So I really feel that there's an education at a very young age, but then through our high schools in terms of career paths, and then there's also an education for the broader adult population that may not be totally aware about the incredible benefits of our tree canopy for mental health and for environmental sustainability and just sheer livability in an urban context. So And then the other issue I wanted to really emphasize.
Councillor Bacon, there's I think a couple more councillors who haven't had.
Oh, beg your pardon. I didn't realize I was jumping in. Sorry.
No problem. I think Councillor Baker may have stepped away. Councillor Mejia?
No, I don't have any questions. Actually, I do. I'm lying. I'm just curious to this whole idea in terms of the equity piece, in terms of looking at the discrepancies in terms of what neighborhoods have more canopies than others. Are there metrics or is there a dashboard? Is there going to be some sort of level of accountability that we're going to be using to track our efforts? And what is that?
Yeah, I was going to turn it over. I think it was Commissioner Ryan Woods who talked about the tree census that has been ongoing to help let us know at base where we are, and then how the census and this ordinance can work together. Commissioner Woods or someone from the administration might be able to help understand how we're being held accountable.
Yeah, I pass it to Maggie Owens. She can best address it. Thanks.
Sure. We definitely want to be able to track the success of the efforts, the strategies that we're putting together. And so that's one of the important things about the indicators of a sustainable urban forest and the matrix, is helping us define what does success look like. And when we do that, we'll also know what kind of resources and staffing do we need to figure that out, to track that over time. And so it's hard to say exactly what that tracking mechanism looks like, but it's definitely something that's needed to keep be accountable to the strategies that we agreed on and the goals and visions and dreams that we've all put together.
And then I'm also curious, thank you for that, Maggie. Then I'm also curious, just one more question. In terms of the communication rollout and the level of engagement, I think it's important. And Chief Hammond, I'm so incredibly grateful that she is in this role, because she understands that, this whole conversation around equity. But I'm curious about the level of engagement that's going to happen with communities of color in particular, in terms of public service announcements, like how are we communicating this to the larger community? Because some folks are saying it's great to have tree canopies, but we're out here dodging bullets. And so how can we really enjoy the greenery if we're still concerned about our public safety? And so just kind of like, how are we thinking about the messaging around the intersectionality of public safety and green space, and how these worlds actually support and can help each other if we're having more intentional conversations. So that's the last question that I have.
So I can share a little bit about that. So up until this point, the Environment Department has had a dedicated comms person, but the Parks Department has not. They have a PIO, but not a dedicated comms person. And we do have someone who does writing. So there's different sets of resources. So one of the things that we've been doing, and we really started over the last month, is actually pulling together all of the communications infrastructure from the Environment Department and the Parks Department, so that we actually can share that infrastructure and actually make it a little bit stronger for everyone. So for instance, Parks has a dedicated graphic designer, Environment doesn't. But Environment has somebody who has more capacity around social media. So the question is, how do we actually combine the best of what both departments have and make that available to the Healthy Places initiative? And they've already done some things, they've already done some help with like putting the website together, et cetera. But we have more capacity now. We hired Stacia Shaputa, who was in the press team, is now leading comms. We've brought in Lindsay Santana, who was at ONS and is now doing community engagement. And so she is connecting with folks also at Parks and trying to share that capacity. So our hope is actually not just for the Healthy Places, but for a lot of the work that we're doing, both on open spaces and on climate change, that we can really step up and increase our ability to communicate with the public and really shape that. And I think I want to also say a quick thank you to those of you who made it out to the Shirley Eustace landmark event on Friday. we did a little bit of a better job than we've done in the past. That was a step forward, and we're going to keep making those steps forward by combining a lot of that sort of firepower that exists between the two cabinets, so that it actually allows us to have a pretty integrated communication strategy. I'm going to hopefully step our game up just a bit. We just got an Instagram. It's not live yet. We trying to make sure we've got it a little bit more organized. But again, how are we doing a better job across the board and using those resources across the cabinet to reach more people? And we've also increased our language capacity. So we have more language capacity internal to the cabinet. Again, that's going to be a longer term process, but sort of more folks that are able to support us around language capacity, which again, just allows us to reach more folks effectively.
I'm very encouraged by the work, and thank you for all of it. And whatever we can do to support it, I'm here for it. I don't have any other further questions or comments, but just know that you have a partner and a big supporter in the space. And please rely on our office and however we can be helpful. Thank you.
So before I go back to Councilor Arroyo with additional questions, and I appreciate the comments and suggestions from David. But I think per what Councilor Arroyo said, we're going to leave the language and the back and forth on that for our working session. I do want to, I guess, make some suggestions and excitement for the overall things that we could address in this. I wasn't sure if you felt this could be part of our job policy, or what jobs you can create from this ordinance in terms of tree stewardship, codifying that part of this enforcement shall be for Boston residents, specifically those who are in the areas of the tree census that lack the most trees. So I'm thinking in terms of equity as we go to implement this. I know we have consultants, I know we have a lot of folks, but making sure that the folks who are grounded in those communities are employed, not just at the table to make suggestions. I mean, really genuinely employed. So just that's the lead sponsors. I hope that could be part of the conversation. I also do want to discuss how we have private and we have public. I was curious how you saw commercial space come in there. When you think of private, I'm thinking houses, backyards, people's individual, within their homes, but how you carve out the hotels that are getting built, or how you carve out on industrial DPA areas that are privately owned but have Chapter 91. Just would like to see some additional push on our coastal requirements, because Massport, for example, is public, private. I don't know what you want to call it, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Braden, but they developed a great deal of East Boston's waterfront, and there are some saplings. I could say they definitely could have done. This ordinance would have definitely pushed them to do more. So hopefully there's a push for those, BPDA owned properties. The whole Navy Yard in Charlestown, for example, is under a public-private gray area. So if the ordinance could be call out those agencies, if we can't do anything else, just call them out directly. Maybe under city owned, it's considered, I don't know, the BPDA. So just calling it out. And then finally, just wanted to make sure that I do want to echo some of the suggestions that the penalties could be increased. So I'll just say that again, at 30,000 foot level, we can deal with that conversation in the working session. So thank you for your leadership, both for the sponsors. I want to go back to Councilor Arroyo for additional questions, and then we will kick it over to public testimony to allow for them to come in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to keep this short so that we can get to public testimony and not keep people waiting much longer. But yes, literally all of these suggestions, keep bringing them. I appreciate every suggestion we get, because eventually when we get to a finish line on this, I want this to be the strongest, most complete version of something. And I've always believed that none of us is smarter than all of us. And so it makes sense to make sure we bring all that stuff in. To the point of the urban forest plan and working that in. So my questions regarding that, and I'll make this quick. What kind of data is the urban forestry team collecting as part of its analysis And how will this inform the recommendations from the urban forestry plan?
Max or Maggie, do you want to talk about what we have so far?
Yeah, I'll start. So as part of the tree inventory, we had consultants who are certified arborists go out and walk every single street in the city of Boston to look and find where all of our street trees are, as well as all of our empty tree pits. They also assessed the trees for health, safety concerns, made notes about them so that we can compile all that data and know where to start, basically. As you know, we're a reactionary division. Everything we do is based on requests. So the data gathered as part of this inventory will actually give us an oversight as to how we can move forward and increase our canopy as well as our tree health and the diversity of the trees that we have. It also tells us canopy cover in that neighborhood of what we as the city own, or as we as the Parks Department oversee within the public right of way.
And I'll just add that we have the public street tree inventory, which gives us a nice fine scale understanding of trees and what's going on there. And then we have the canopy analysis that looks at the tree tops across the city, regardless of private and public. And so we do have two different levels of information available. I just want to make that clear. But in general, we have that data that we've collected or are collecting and going through quality control, but we also have things that maybe are less traditionally considered data. And we consider that to be like community members' lived experiences and what they're seeing happening and why it's happening and all that. So I just want to emphasize that we're also collecting that sort of data, which is often the missing piece in getting things to work.
I appreciate you emphasizing that. That's really important to me as well in terms of crafting this. And then for a final question, will the city be reviewing and creating a database census for private property trees in each neighborhood? And if so, when and how will this be completed?
That would require a lot more resources.
Okay.
And it would require, and I think there's two pieces. It's resources, and then we can't just walk onto private land and start documenting. So what Maggie mentioned is we can take aerial views and be able to sort of, kind of like have some sense of like how much square footage or what percentage of the city has greenery of it over it. But to get to that level of detail would require both power that we don't currently have to just walk onto people's, property, and second, require a level of resources that greatly exceeds what we have even aspirations for in the short term.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go now to public testimony. Folks that are signed up or at least requested the link, I have the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, Margaret Renault, or someone representing them. Then Joanna Hines. And then I have a Nancy Aleo and a Sarah Freeman. So we can bring them over to panelists right now. And I think it's N-A-L-E-O is Nancy. If the Conservancy would like to go ahead.
Great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Erica Holm. I'm a Forest Hills resident and the field operations coordinator for the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. We think an ordinance would be a great tool to protect trees, especially on private land where there has been significant loss. I have three main concerns with the ordinance as it's written right now that I'd like to be considered in the working sessions. The first has to do with the operational realities. Our forestry division already lacks support in terms of both monetary and human capital to conduct the level of tree care our city deserves. How can we better hire, trust, support, and provide resources to committed natural resource professionals who've dedicated their lives to this in tree protection roles before adding additional responsibilities to singular and expansive roles that exist within the Parks Department? Don't we need to get those roles better supported? The second is the drafting process and timeline. What models were looked at from other cities? What research was used to draft this ordinance? Can we make that public? Do we fully understand the metrics we should use? So there's tree canopy, individual stems, there's view considerations and acreage. What do those really indicate, and how specifically do we plan to produce those metrics accurately and consistently over time? I'd encourage a thorough review of the ordinance specifics, including evaluating how those requirements will influence the system as a whole, rather than just one metric or another. Another couple points, the penalties and incentives should encourage maintenance of trees rather than payment of fees, and equity should be central to that. And we need to make sure the ordinance doesn't inadvertently prevent or impede environmental restoration projects. For example, if a lethal tree pest is threatening the population, and a best practice would be to remove some of those and replant something else that will be more resilient, that shouldn't be impeded by this. Third, some concerns about the staff term lengths and method of appointment for positions and the committee that were presented. I'm very concerned with the highly political design and the speed of turnover. So a single planted tree could take about 3 to 5 years to fully establish in the urban environment. So having a 3-year tree warden doesn't seem to be long enough to me for a tree that we're hoping will stick around for 100 years. Let's try to get 50 at least on those. And the ideal situation does call for an advisory committee with rotating involvement to ensure diversity and inclusion are prioritized. Absolutely. It also includes long-term, highly committed operational staff, potentially from a green jobs pipeline, who can understand and guide the urban forest over a long time horizon, carry out the vision of the urban forest plan. So we really think it would be important for this to be reviewed and learned about in committee and community before enacting an ordinance. Adds the needed tree protection, but we need to make sure the effort is well planned, well supported, and well operationalized. Thanks.
Thank you. Joanna Hines.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's had great things to say. Let me just turn my other one off. And I'm glad that this conversation's happening. But I think the biggest point, I mean, I have so much I want to say, and I'm not going to take up the time with all of it, but we need a moratorium on all tree cutting until we have a plan. Anything else is lip service. We need a plan before we can move forward with tree cutting, in my opinion. Am I even on this? Is anyone there? I'm not seeing anybody.
No,
yes, you're on. We hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't see any picture. You know, it's one thing to say we're going to do this, but developers hear that and they come in with their chainsaws and they try to get it done fast before the plan is done. We need a clear and very concise statement that puts a pause on all tree cutting, particularly or specifically on city-owned land. I would like to know, and I've asked but haven't heard back, how many trees have been approved for demolition by the BCDC and the BPDA board members since the pandemic started. These Zoom meetings are happening at a pace that makes it impossible to stay engaged without burning out. And so within the last, 18 to 20 months, how many trees have been approved for decimation? And then I'd like to say something else, because there were so many good points made, and so many. But as far as getting voices to come forward, especially those that are already living in, on industry edge, and, kids who have asthma are struggling financially. It's really hard to get people, and especially from public housing developments, to engage on this. And I have firsthand experience. I'm very comfortable saying this. When the local newspaper, the Patriot Bridge, isn't even delivered to their homes. And I can verify that. And when I asked the paperman if that was a new thing, he said, no, we've never delivered it door to door there. That's called discrimination based on income. So you can't ask people to be engaged when they don't know what's going on. You can elect 5 people or select 5 people to say they represent 2,500 residents, but they don't. And that's also verifiable from a lot of the interviews that I've had with residents from the Bunker Hill Housing Development, hundreds. I have a few questions. One is, what is the plan for the trees that are on the chopping block but haven't been chopped down yet? Because on Boston Housing Authority land alone, there are over 1,000 mature trees that will be cut down if the city doesn't step in. So I just have a hard time reconciling this path forward and sort of neglecting what we have now. And I'd like to ask also, when it comes to educating the public, that's huge. Like, people need to understand what's at stake, that our very air is at stake, that the way we feel in our bodies when we can't breathe well, that's at stake. And that will impact everything we do. I just want to know, do the counselors, do the members of the commissions, do the city employees, I mean, I say this broadly, but do you see that there is a difference between a heritage tree and a sapling? Because in Charlestown, we're losing 340 trees. And I say that because we're losing all of them. And we're having them replaced with a few more per tree saplings that will never make it. Because the 27 acres that's there today, only 9 acres of that is hardscape. And when this development is done, it will be 21 acres of hardscape. No, I'm sorry, 23. So we're not just losing trees, we're losing open space. And it's not for the people that live there. It's for the 1,700 market value rentals that will take up 75% of the hardscape. A little nugget will be left for the people that live there now. And that just feels wrong. So I hope that the city, the people that we trust to protect our rights to breathe, please turn that off, we'll do something, do anything. But I think having some sort of moratorium so that we can make a plan before we have nothing to plan around because the tree's gone would be a really good idea. And also, if there are open lots on industrial edges, just because they're underutilized doesn't mean they can't be used well and made into urban forest parks. So, like I said, there's more, but, and then the last thing is the companies that you guys use, the city uses to take trees down, for instance, Maltby tree. I just read a report in February or in January 2020 on record. I asked the developer, Leggett McCall and the EHA, how many trees were on the parcel, because no one else did. My city councilor didn't think to ask. The state rep didn't think to ask. The BCDC didn't think to ask. Nobody asked, are there any trees on this piece of land? There were over 350 at that time, 80 to 100-year-old trees. Nobody asked. And when they were asked, they punted. They didn't provide an inventory until November. But guess what happened in that period between? They hired Maltby and took down dozens of heritage trees. And I have the reports to show it. So when we're, outsourcing these groups to take care of the dirty work, the tree cutting, we need to understand the language that's being used. When we, there in this report, there was a police detail, there was an airlifting. The cost was over $33,000 just to kill these trees that weren't sick. They were just in the way. The trees aren't in the way. We need to work around them because they're part of our infrastructure. And then I just want to say one last thing, and it's very emotional, actually, this whole thing. Back to the idea of getting voices to come forward. At the tree meeting that was held on March 15th, and really it was just a tree presentation with some political sponsors. At one point, the head developer person, the representative Adelaide Grady, said, and this is a quote, Leggett McCall is prepared to walk away from this deal if the tree issue isn't put to bed. So if I'm someone who needs a new home and I don't want to live with mold, I'd like to keep my trees, but it doesn't seem like I can have both. Am I really going to push back? Am I going to oppose that kind of ultimatum, that kind of threat? It's all on record. You can look it up. It's all on record. It's one of the only good things about Zoom is that everything's recorded. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that's really all I have. A moratorium on cutting down trees specifically from city land or city affiliated land until we have our act together. You can't, these trees aren't replaceable. The root ball spreads as wide as the canopy. So where's that root ball going to spread? The cement came after a lot of those trees were planted. I really hope that we can all come together because we're a network just like the trees. And we need each other. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Nancy Aleo.
Hi, thank you. I'm a resident of Roslindale, and I don't want to say too much, but I want to, I'm grateful for this proposed tree ordinance. I'm really here to support David's Speak for the Trees suggestions, and I hope they're taken seriously in the working groups. I also want to name a few points of, I think education and inclusiveness is key. I think as an educator myself, I feel that that is a key towards inspiring youth that may consider being arborists or working with parks and city as they develop young people. In the beginning, how David mentions young people were so inspired by the city arborist coming and showing them what he does. I also want to make sure that the ordinance is the best possible ordinance, and we don't leave loopholes for developers to be able to take down trees. I want to give one example of a place in South America, Buenos Aires, Argentina, that has the most amazing trees in the city because of a urban landscape city person who had a vision. The trees are enormous. If you've never seen them, please look them up. It has a large landscape that is sort of Italian European based, but you would think with the amount of traffic that the air quality would be horrible, but it's not because of the trees. So that's one thing I want to mention. Plus, what the last person, Joanna, mentioned about the moratorium, while we are working on this ordinance, developers are moving forward. And I'll give one example. Down the street in Roslindale from where I live is Crane's Ledge Woods, which is 14 acres that a developer wants to cut down the trees and put in 270 units, 415 parking spaces, mostly paved over area where it's just, that's going to be lost in the blink of an eye and you can't get it back. So I really feel that we have to slow down on some of the development. I'm all for affordable housing that's on already paved over land, not cutting down woodlands. And as the pandemic sort of demonstrated, as experts all over kept saying that being in nature is a very important component to our mental health. And I think they say it over and over again. And the trees are part of that for all the reasons mentioned, but I really hope we can have the most robust tree ordinance, and we don't let developers rush ahead and cut down trees, because when we cut down a tree, we don't get it back in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Freeman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having this conversation. I think it's hugely important and will come as a surprise to no one that I'm very supportive that Boston get a tree protection ordinance in place. I'll use a quote that you've probably all heard before. The best time for a tree protection ordinance was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. But let's take the time, and I'm glad to hear Councillor Arroyo talk about a working group for the details. Let's take the time to really make it meaningful and get it right. I won't repeat what others have said, but I was glad to hear David, Erica, Johanna, and Nancy give some details. Oh, sorry. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I'm with the Arborway Coalition, Emerald Necklace Conservancy, Park Advisor, Boston Urban Forest Friends. Let's see, I'll try to be brief. Some things that I think are not in the ordinance that I hope people will consider is what's below ground, not just caliper inches or canopy, but there's a critical root zone. And a landscape architect friend described it as biomass when you're looking at what you would potentially lose if you lose a tree. And I like the idea of a moratorium until we figure out what we're doing. A few closing comments. I don't know if you saw recently, there was an article, I think in the New York Times, about Athens, Greece. And it's funny, we're called the Athens of America. People are dying. In fact, I think globally, more people die from heat than from cold. This is a public health issue, and solutions, natural solutions, are often overlooked. We hear about other important things more, like the Beardo. I'm happy to hear the construction or electric cars, but there's something we can do by just leaving some trees in place. And I guess my last comment is the earlier in the process, when Johanna mentioned BCDC or BPDA, I heard a developer who was in the unfortunate position of having a project pretty far along in design, but wanting to work with the neighborhood. And one of the neighbors said, well, didn't it occur to you that the neighborhood might not want to lose these trees or might value keeping them? And he said, well, the city didn't have it as a, one of their requirements. So no, we didn't think about that. And it was just kind of a splash of cold water that the city needs to say, and I'm not naive. I don't expect that you're not going to lose any trees. But if they say, we expect you to go through certain reasonable steps, plot where the trees are, try to work around them, especially the significant ones. There are ways it can be done. And I want to just say on the record, as Nancy did, I'm for affordable housing. Want our communities to not displace people or not have people living in unhealthy, poorly maintained housing. But we've got to find a way to have both. We don't need to draw a line and say either you're for one or the other. A healthy community has both. And thank you. I look forward to seeing how this evolves.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Lakita Jackson. I don't know if Kay Matthew has joined us or not. And then that would complete the people who RSVP to speak. Also signed up is a Kathy Baker, also available for public testimony. And I'll just call your names. Kathy Baker Eclipse, Ava Paradiso, So I think LJ. Is LJ, are you Lakita?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought I was unmuted. Forgive me, everyone. So first, my name is Lokita Jackson. Forgive my name. I should have renamed it for Zoom. But thank you to Councilors Arroyo and Braden for filing this ordinance. And to you, Councilor Edwards, as chair of this meeting. I appreciate it. I'm excited about the ordinance. I do realize that I may be sharing some quick points with preaching to the choir, so to speak, but just to state, for every acre of mature trees that we have, it absorbs about 2.5 tons of carbon every year and releases oxygen, of course, in exchange. And so I know that the previous one or two people mentioned Crane Ledge Woods, and so I just agree with what they said, as well as what Johanna mentioned as far as the request for a moratorium now, because that particular woodland is under threat. But I completely also agree and support David Meshulam's suggested points. And I also appreciate Councilor Braden's public education point, especially for adults, as well as all the way down through youth, at the intersection of Councilor Mejia's perspective on communities of color dealing with other vices that can sometimes overshadow the understanding of the urgency of tree preservation or protection or expansion. And so one of the things I wanted to put forth was just to agree and really ask for those future public communications to seriously consider, that you would seriously consider and integrate concrete, relatable examples of what climate change impacts looks like on the average citizen, especially the BIPOC community. Because to Councilor Mejia's point, I know she went to a serious situation extreme as far as dodging bullets. But even if I were a single mother raising a couple of children, climate change, if I don't really know the impact and what that looks like, its effect directly on me or my children, probably would not be on the top of my priorities list. And so for future communications, I offer that suggestion that there will be concrete examples in those communications as part of the education of the adults. And I know it's not unique to the BIPOC community, but historically speaking of how we have more struggle with just surviving in life in the city of Boston and beyond, it's important that we make it relatable so that the urgency of the climate crisis is conveyed and communicated and understood by all Boston residents. And then in addition to that, I just wanted to also point out that I understand that there's more planning that needs to go around the ordinance and healthy spaces. But I am curious as to where we are now with understanding under what conditions do you foresee the private tree removal applications being denied? Because as I read the ordinance, and again, I understand there's more planning, but as I read the ordinance, I didn't understand or see anything explicitly stating the conditions under which private tree removal applications would be denied. So I'm curious about that. Thank you.
Excellent points. Thank you so much, Ms. Jackson. Up next, I think I had Eva Pardisco.
Oh, it looks like my camera's not working, but hopefully you can hear me. So I'm Eva Perdiso, and I work with Speak for the Trees. And this summer I had the pleasure of working with 15 Boston Public School students and teaching them about urban forestry. And I just really want to place an emphasis on getting youth involved in this process, because I truly believe that the students I worked with learned so much this summer and created such deep connections with the trees in the city of Boston. And I think it's really important to think about career paths for them in the future. And many, almost all of them knew little to nothing about being an arborist and what it actually looks like to go into urban forestry. And by the end of the program, we had multiple students who were very interested in becoming an arborist. So I think it's so important to continue to create opportunities for youth because they really are the future and they care so deeply about the city of Boston and the tree canopy. So thank you.
Thank you. After Eva.
May I just interject real quick? Because there's one of our youth is here as a participant. I just want to call out that Carly is in the room listening to this, and these teens really do care.
Well, good. I'm about to call on folks to speak, and Carly was going to be one of them. Just making sure. Yep, okay. So up next we have Curly Pierre and Yvonne Lallier. Apologies for if I didn't pronounce names, but if they can bring them over and they can say some brief remarks. And then I'm going to turn it over to the lead sponsors who will, unfortunately I have to leave, but the lead sponsors will be able to conclude this hearing and will note that we will have a working session to clarify and perfect the language. Curly or Carly? Pierre? And right. If not, then I would go to Yvonne.
Hi. Hi. Good to be here. Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo and the whole council for having a hearing on this issue. I live in Lower Roxbury next to the Maniacasi Boulevard, and I'm still very thankful for the council to have had that hearing that allows us to stop that devastating project that was going to get rid of 250 trees. I support all of David's comments. I think he's right on target. I support Johanna's moving testimony of the trees in Charlestown. I've been there and wanted to also point out that Councillor Lydia talked about the responsibility that the state has to have with the trees that are in the 32. I give money. I said I am witness the road that goes to down, and the trees are definitely not taken care of. The state needs to be called on to this. Things that I think bother me still about the ordinance and the state of affairs in the city regarding trees is one here years, and I never get a whether they were, whether the accepted or not. And I think there's perhaps it's an issue of not having enough personnel to do this. But I think everybody who attends the meeting should get a response from the warden saying, okay, this tree hearing resulted in this and that. I'd never get that. The other thing that I am concerned about is the contract, as someone said, that trees after 3 years is not enough. I have in my neighborhood, I see the trees that have, died. I don't know, but they are, little trees that have any leaves, and I'm trying to save them. I'm going to save it because I noticed that they would die. The communication between the community and the city and the warden in my neighborhood is a locust tree, and we live in a heat island. We don't need any more locusts in our neighborhood. We need shade trees. Wrong. 2 years, 3 years is not enough. I have in my neighborhood, is a locust tree, and we live in a heat island. We don't need any more locusts in our neighborhood. We need shade trees. Wrong. 2 years, 3 years is not enough. I have in my neighborhood, is a locust tree, and we live in a heat island. We don't need any more locusts in our neighborhood. We need shade trees. our neighborhood. And I don't know how that was done. It was split and it had already yellow leaves. The bag of water was empty. I had to put 15 gallons of water. There's a sign that says this tree needs so much water, but I don't know who they contacted to make sure that we take care of the trees. I think that I don't know how you could do that in the ordinance, but that there should be some communication with the neighborhood when a tree is planted, so we all know about it and that we know how to take care of it. The other thing, finally, the last thing that I wanted to say is that I think the property of the BPDA should be considered public property because this is considered a private property, and every time I see a proposal and a request for a proposal from the BPDA, it shows not a single tree in those lots that are being given for development, and I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed at the BPDA. That the trees that are existing on the property that they want to dispose of should be accounted for before anything is proposed. And I think I'm done. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for hearing me. Thank you. And I hope we get to this. I also want to support, of course, Sarah's comments, and that we should have a moratorium. I think it's something that we really need to look at because this is a serious issue, especially in our neighborhoods where we have so few trees. Thank you so much. I'm done, but I could keep talking. I think Councilor Lydia.
I think Madam Chair, is I think it's me or Councilor Braden now taking over for the public comment part.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Yvonne.
And
I'm not sure who still remains who has not had public comment yet. If you can just hit on the Zoom, if you can raise your hand so that I can call on you if you have not yet spoken. I'm not seeing any hands. I'm going to give it a couple minutes.
Counselor, I think the only person that's not in it is still an attendee is a staffer of the Parks Department, that Kathy Baker Clips. I think everyone else has moved over to panelists to speak.
Okay, so as everybody, so I guess that means we've finished our community comment.
I believe so.
Hi, Councilor Arroyo, it's Christine. I believe all of the people that have signed up have spoken.
Fantastic. And the only person left over is from Parks. So Thank you so much, everybody, for your comments. Thank you so much for the feedback that I know you will continue to give as we go through this process and get this done. Thank you, Commissioner Woods. Thank you to the administration. Thank you, Chief Mariama Hammond. Thank you, everybody who has taken part in this. Thank you to the counselors, especially my original co-sponsor, Councilor Braden. And I look forward to working with everybody in the coming months to try and get something shaped here that satisfies the most amount of people, but most importantly, does the most to protect our trees. So thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.